All right, folks. Big news. Tons of nerfs. Demon Hunter, Dragon Queen Alex, Rogue, a little bit of everything. Lots of cards getting changed here.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Yeah, so it looks like 8 cards here getting nerfed, including 3 Demon Hunter cards. And I don't have graphics prepared. I'm doing this quick. This was the blog post. Blizzard didn't do graphics either. So bear with me as we read through these. But I'll try to make it as easy to understand as I can. First up is Dragon Queen Alexstrasza. She's going to be changed so that the dragons she generates go from 0 mana to 1 mana. Now, this means if you play her on 9 mana, you can't play any of the dragons immediately. So that kind of pushes her back a turn almost, where you kind of have to play her on 10 in order to get a second really low cost, high tempo dragon out. And that means that you're not going to be able to play 3 dragons in a single turn without, help from discounts or the coin or whatever it might be. So it is going to be both a slower card, I think, and a lower swing impact card, because you're not going to be dumping 3 giant dragons. And sometimes, you need the 2 dragons in combination with each other to do something really cool, right? So like Varanus to lower something's health, and then a rush minion to trade into the thing, right? So little kind of 2 card combos for the dragons aren't going to work as well on the same turn. Of course, you can wait and play both later, but ultimately it's not going to be that big swing turn that you normally expect with Dragon Queen Alex. So yeah, I think this makes Alex notably weaker across a couple of different angles there. Now, I think she'll still be played. Just Highlander decks need cards, and on average, the Dragon Queen Alex is still going to be better than some other random card. But particularly like fast Highlander decks might have to cut Dragon Queen Alex, because suddenly she doesn't offer that kind of late game follow up high pressure turn that she did in the past. So, maybe only slower, more control, mid rangey style Highlander decks can really squeeze her in. So even maybe like Highlander Hunter suddenly doesn't like Alexstrasza as much, because they perhaps want more pressure and they want to start ending the game sooner. But maybe, say, Highlander Mage is still quite happy to run Alexstrasza for various dragon synergies, and because they don't mind playing a little bit slower and more reactive in some cases. So yeah, I think she's notably worse. So next up here is Corsair Cash. It used to give +1/+1. Now it's only going to add to durability and not attack. So typically, Warrior is using this with weapons that are 2/2s and pushing them to 3/3 weapons. Now they're only going to be 2/3 weapons. But in both cases, for Livewire Lance and Ankar, Warriors cared more, I think, about the durability than the attack. In fact, with Demon Hunters everywhere and 2 health minions, 2 attack is usually sufficient anyway to answer a lot of those early minions. So I think the attack nerf here, although certainly meaningful and will challenge things like killing 3/3s, it's really the durability that matters most, because you care more about drawing and you care more about generating lackeys. So I think Corsair Cash remains a very powerful card. It's more about that tutor aspect, more about that extra durability. So it's going to be weaker. It will hurt Warrior in general, but it will not kill this card by any means. I think Corsair Cash still gets played in the decks it's in now and will be a strong card moving forward as well. So next up here, let's get into the Demon Hunter cards. Metamorphosis going from 5 damage to 4 damage per ping, taking a total damage output from 10 down to 8. Now, Metamorphosis is just like such an insane card. It feels like it always inevitably ends the game, because it's so much pressure over 2 turns. And, 8 damage is still a lot of damage for Demon Hunter. The question is, like, how many times is that going to change the breakpoints where it's like, man, I would have had lethal with the old one, but I don't with the new one? I'd say occasionally, but I think Metamorphosis is still so much damage bundled into a single card, really, and still only for 7 mana, right? It's still fairly efficient compared to other kinds of damage, particularly just because the way it's kind of inevitable and you can kind of bank it for later. I think it remains a high utility damage output card, just less efficient than it was, but still good enough for Demon Hunter. Now, I think Demon Hunter is going to be weaker, and Metamorphosis will be weaker in turn, but it kind of stays level with its class and probably holds up well enough to keep seeing play. So next up there is Kane Sunfury going from 5 health down to 4 health. I think this is really a pretty subtle change for Kane. Typically, Kane has the most value when you're using him to end the game anyway, whether that's to push through taunt or just deal 3 charging damage. And his health total doesn't matter in those instances, because the game is over anyway. So this really limits these sort of like turn 4 tempo Kanes, or maybe just his ability to trade on board. Maybe hurts him in mirror matchups a little bit with Demon Hunters, making him easier to remove. So a limited impact here, meaningful again, but just not particularly significant and not changing the main avenue for the card's success. So Kane still looks very powerful to me. I think he's going to be a great card. Moving on here to Gleaves of Azzinoth, going up to 6 mana from 5 mana. And this one's perplexing to me. I think Warglaves at 5 is like one of the best cards in Demon Hunter. It's really, really good. It's so much damage output. It can do crazy things. But for some reason, that mana cost seems significantly worse at 6 for me. First off, it's competing with things like Skull of Gul'dan, where you might want to play them both on the same turn, and that becomes a little bit more challenging. But also just, the kinds of damage it does are less impactful the later they happen in the game, whether that's, just face damage or trading into minions. It becomes harder to find those breakpoints to push through minions. You can't play other things with it as easily in those middle turns, like 6-7 mana turns. You kind of reload one. So for some reason, that feels like a significant change to me. I think at the end of the day, when I look at it, it still feels like a good, efficient card at 6 mana. But I have a feeling some lists are going to toy with cutting it and running some of the 3 mana weapon, like Lifesteal Weapon instead. Maybe Eldrazi just makes more sense when you consider the difference between those two. So we might see lists shift away from Warglaves a little bit. So I'm more worried about Warglaves than the other 2 cards for Demon Hunter here getting nerfed as far as its playability. It's probably still good enough, but I have some doubts. Next up here is Dragoncaster going to 7 mana from 6. And really, this one's just about limiting those crazy turns that Mage can pull off with things like Yogg's Puzzle Box coming down super early in the game and just stealing games outright. I don't think Dragoncaster from like a power level standpoint was too high. It just created some pretty big feel bad moments, and I think Blizzard wanted to pull back on those feel bad moments and slow them down a little bit to give other decks more time to react and have those scary, crazy swing puzzle box turns happen slightly later in the game. So it doesn't feel like games are just ripped out from under you as often or as quickly. So ultimately a good change. I think Dragoncaster actually is still a fine card. It kind of moves into that Inkmaster Solia space. So perhaps that's a limitation, but I think it would still be played at 7 in the current iterations of Highlander Mage as we see them. So I think it's fine. Next up here is Fungal Fortunes going from 2 to 3. So this limits Spell Druid's power level a little. Nonetheless, I still think it's a really powerful card. Drawing 3 cards for 3 mana is efficient compared to lots of other things in Hearthstone that see play. At 2, it was pretty absurd, and it worked really, really well with Spell Druid in particular because they could even play it late in the game once they already had their Mount Seller down on board. It was cheap enough to move into those turns. Now it's a little bit more limiting on those Mount Seller turns. This is something you're probably more happy to play early in the game, which does make it compete for space a little bit with some of the ramp cards that Druid might be liking to play instead, or maybe they need to get that Bog Beam down on 3 to clear a minion. It's like suddenly you got to move Fungal Fortunes to 3, and then you don't have that turn 2. So there are some breakpoints here where I think it's really important that Fungal Fortunes moves to 3 and does limit the power level of the deck. So yeah, I think it's still a good card. It probably still gets played, but it does make Spell Druid a little bit worse. And then finally here, Galakrond the Nightmare, the Rogue Galakrond. Instead of drawing 0 mana cards, he's now going to draw cards and reduce them to 1 instead of 0 mana. So if he draws 4 cards, you're going to have to spend 4 mana to play them instead of spending 0 mana to play them. Same for 2 and 1. And that's a pretty big difference, right? Because as it stands, Rogue loves cheap cards. Getting those crazy Edwin turns off this, for instance, will be a little bit more challenging. You can't play other lackeys alongside it, essentially. You're giving up other cards you might want to play in that chain and in that sequence. And it just, 0 mana cards are powerful. Same story with Dragon Queen Alexstrasza. It just limits what you can do, the kinds of crazy swing turns that you can have. And that's important right now. Hearthstone has what many people are calling a scam meta, where it feels like people just rip games out from under you. They completely steal a game that you would otherwise have won because of crazy 0 mana card shenanigans. This limits that. It makes Galakrond Rogue notably worse because they do often win on those big turns. They still have High Spear and Togwaggle, obviously, but 2 of their big power 0 mana discounts. One of them is now limited pretty substantially, I think. Still a good card. Galakrond still gets played in the deck. Galakrond Rogue still a thing, but it just pulls down that power level a little bit and limits what Rogue can do, which is important because when you make all these other decks worse, Rogue could stand to gain too much ground. And I'm glad that Rogue and Spell Druid and all these other classes that don't seem particularly oppressive right now, they might be in a world where everything else gets nerfed. So just go ahead and preemptively adjust those as well. That's a good sign. So Rogue here is worse, but not dead by any means. So all in all here, crazy changes. I did know this was coming, but I didn't know what the changes were. There's some pretty big impacts to classes and decks that are a big part of the meta. We needed it. Things needed to freshen up a little bit. So hopefully some decks can find space to grow and be played and shake up the meta here in light of these changes. That said, I'm curious what you guys think. Was this too much? Was it not enough? Was it the right stuff? Was it the wrong stuff? How is this going to change the game? Share all those very insightful thoughts in the comments below. But until then, thanks much for watching, and until next time, game on.